The first thing I remember is the way she smiled. Not a friendly, neighborly smile, something that lived at the hinge of the mouth and never moved anywhere else. As if a photograph had somehow learned to grin. It was late, the kind of late that makes a building breathe. Radiators ticking, distant pipes knocking like a slow heart. I was leaning against my kitchen counter, the sink full of cold water, when I saw her on the balcony across the courtyard. The light from her doorway cut a rectangle into the night, and she stood inside it, half in shadow, head tilted, watching me as if she'd been waiting. I felt the first ripple of wrongness in my throat. The air tasted faintly of bleach and old coffee. The hallway smelled of warm plastic and the perfume of a neighbor's dinner. She lifted her hand in a small, precise wave. Her fingers were long and unnaturally still, the way a puppet's hand might be posed. When she smiled that same smile, I realized I did not know her name. I had lived in the building for 3 years, passed her in the stairwell more times than I could count, but never once had she spoken. Tonight she was smiling, like she was seeing something private, something only she and I shared. I told myself it was nothing. People look at each other at night. People smile for reasons we don't ask about. I rinsed the plates and kept stealing glances, each one fighting the instinct to look away. When I went to the window and stood with my forehead almost resting on the glass, the city's muffled hum folded around us. She did not move from the doorway. She simply leaned one shoulder against the frame, the dark fabric of her dress feathering into the gloom. Her eyes glinted, not in the way of reflection, but as if light were crawling out of them. For a second, I thought I saw the whites ripple, like fish skin. Then something small and human happened. She mouthed a word. I cupped my hand around my ear and keyed up the volume of the world, but all I could hear was the distant clatter of a train and the neighbor's television through the thin wall. I pressed my palm to the glass and my breath fogged the pain. When I could see again, she had stepped forward onto the balcony rail, not leaning, standing, as if balance were easy for her. The gesture was casual, careless, her head cocked with that same fixed smile, and her eyes narrowed, like a dog listening for a sound only it could hear. A laugh bubbled out of my throat, because fear sometimes tastes like a laugh. It was a defensive noise, brittle and useless. I told myself to call someone, anyone, but the number sat on my tongue like an accusation. Instead, I watched her lower her hand slowly, deliberately, until the faintest scrape of nail against metal reached me. It sounded like paper being creased, the tiny noise amplified in the night, and in that scrap, I felt the first true chill crawl down my arms. After that night, nothing stayed small for long. The smile became a metronome in my days, there in the periphery, a slow, patient beat that measured how I moved through the world. I stopped taking the stairs when I knew she might be in the doorway. I timed my work runs so I would pass her only at noon, when sunlight washed the courtyard and her shadow was less convincing. But the building has its own rhythms, and rhythms find you. One afternoon I came home and found my doormat pushed slightly askew, as if someone had stepped on the corner and then gone. It was a trivial thing, but trivial things are the first sign of a pattern. That weekend, my coffee tasted faintly metallic. I blamed the kettle until I saw the smear on the rim of my favorite mug, a thin crescent of dirt or dried rust shaped like a smile. I scrubbed until my knuckles hurt and the pattern remained, stubborn beneath the glaze as if lodged in the ceramic itself. I thought of leaving a note, of confronting her through the hallway door, but every time I stood outside my neighbor's doorway, the air changed, tighter, cold between the walls, and the thought of knocking felt obscene. Instead, I started to watch the reflections. In the black of my television screen at night, or in the slender curve of a spoon left on the counter, she appeared and reappeared. A shape at the balcony's edge, the same head tilt, the same impossible smile. When I blinked, the image remained for a half-second longer than it should have, like a ghost clinging to a frame. Sleep grew thin and rumor-like. I woke at 3 in the morning to the sound of someone humming outside my window, a tuneless thing that slid through the glass and pooled on my pillow. Once I grabbed my phone to record it, the file held nothing but static and the high, distant whine of a refrigerator. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the recording until I found, halfway through, a single frame of grainy footage. My balcony empty, a smear of shadow where no one stood. When I played it back, the smear was gone, as if the file had decided to forget. Neighbors offered the explanations people keep for the inexplicable: stress, too much coffee, loneliness. They saw me watch The Courtyard and felt pity. My friend Mark joked that I'd watched too many films, but the joke died on his face when, the next day, he sent me a picture he'd taken of my building from across the street. In the photograph, clear as daylight, there was a woman on my balcony, head cocked, smiling. I'd been inside when he took it. The balcony door had been locked. I tried small rebellions. I left my balcony light on, stepped out and waited. The night held its breath with me. For an hour nothing happened. The city murmured. Then, from 3 floors below, a thin scraping noise climbed the bricks, a fingernail against mortar. It moved in a slow, deliberate line until it stopped directly beneath my window. I pressed my ear to the sill and heard it, the faint, paper-thin sound of something being folded and folded again, and beneath that, a soft, familiar inhale, as if someone were preparing to speak an old secret. When I looked up, her face was not outside. It was pressed against the glass from inside my own room. That night, the city felt thin, like paper stretched over a frame. The air in my apartment tasted of iron and wet cloth. Every sound was exaggerated. The fridge's hum, a distant jet. My own blood, a slow drum in my temples. I remember the way the light from the hallway pooled at the doorway and how my breath made small clouds against it. She stood there when I turned, impossibly calm, as if she had been waiting to be invited in. Her dress hung damp and smelled of mildew and old roses. When she moved, it was with a patience that belonged to someone who has all the time in the world to study you. I tried to speak, but my voice came out small, like a child's in a deep room. She tilted her head and traced a fingertip across her teeth. The sound was wet and intimate. Up close, her smile was full of tiny crevices, like a map of fissures in old paint. She smelled of the courtyard after rain. She smelled like the inside of my grandmother's house and the antiseptic of a hospital corridor. The smell made my stomach lurch with a memory I couldn't place. I backed toward the door, every step making the floorboards complain. The knob was warm, as if someone had just let go of it. Behind me, she hummed that hollow tune, the one that had invaded my nights, but now there were words threaded through it, soft syllables that pressed against my spine. I fumbled my phone and dialed Mark, because dialing feels like an action that proves you are still a body in the world. His number rang and rang until the battery warning blinked. No answer. When I turned back, she was closer, so close I could see the tiny flecks in her eyes. She lifted her hand and placed it flat against my chest over my heart. I felt the cold of her palm seep into me. It was like being plunged into ice, slow enough to make you forget warmth. My ribs tightened as if someone had looped a string around my lungs and pulled. Her smile did not falter. She leaned in and breathed into my ear, and for the first time the melody resolved into a sentence. "Come look," she whispered, and the voice was my voice, stretched thin and unfamiliar. I stumbled toward the balcony without understanding why my legs obeyed. The courtyard below was a dark river of windows and empty squares. From 3 floors down came a camera's click, Mark taking the picture that would later prove nothing and everything. I stepped out onto the rail and felt the metal cold through my slippers. She stood behind me, hands resting lightly on my shoulders. I felt them as if they were mine. The city noises faded until all that remained was the scrape of fabric and the small, delighted sound of someone pleased with a secret. I thought I might fight, might shove, might scream until my lungs tore. Instead, my face split and the smile arrived like a foreign tide, slow, inevitable, and perfectly placed. I looked down at the street at the tiny figures moving like toys, and at the building that had always felt familiar and foreign in equal measure. In the reflection of the glass behind us, 2 faces gleamed, hers and mine, identical, both smiling in the same impossible way. I remembered the photograph Mark sent, the woman on my balcony whose door had been locked. I remembered the smear on my mug and the scraping on the bricks. Memory and present folded over each other until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I leaned forward, the night air filling my lungs, and for a moment I felt nothing but a curious, terrible calm, as if some small, patient thing had finally found its place. Now they will see me.
Subscribe to Horror Story Bar.